So, welcome back, everybody, to sewing. It's a little bit chilly today, so I'm wearing a little bit of a jacket. And Bruce is sitting behind me because he's cold. And I was thinking about doing a video on pleats, but and then I was really debating it. And then one of my friends was texting me yesterday, hey, they need these pleated face masks at the hospital for coronavirus. And I was like, oh, okay. So I'm going to do a face mask today with pleats in it. Even though I prefer the other kind, I'm going to make one with the pleats so that way you can see how pleats work. And I've gotten some things already taken care of. So I'm using a pattern that I found on Joann that I'll put in the description. But it says to pre-wash the fabric. I am not going to pre-wash the fabric on this one, and then I can see how much it shrinks or something like that. But normally you would want to pre-wash the fabrics. And I'm going to use one of these remnants that I bought a couple weeks ago. It's 45 inches wide and 30 inches in length. I paid $1.25. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and open that up. Where the fold is right here, that's where it's been rolled up. So I'm just going to cut right there. Not using my fabric scissors. Okay, as you can see, if I've cut it correctly, I won't have cut through the fabric. And then there's more paper here, and I unroll it. The paper's all along here. And I can throw that away. And now I have this bit of fabric. Okay. It says that a good piece of fabric should be that when it's folded in half, which it is folded in half, you can't see through it, but you can breathe through it. So I can breathe through that. So I'm using a fabric that doesn't have any pattern on it on purpose, so that way it is easier to not get confused by the folds that I'm going to be making, which are going to be the pleats. So you could use a printed fabric, but it's going to be easier if you use something that's a plain, okay? Also, the other thing I have prepared, where did I put it? Oh, it's on the floor. Okay. I took some graph paper. So this pattern that I'm using says to make, says to use the main piece of fabric needs to be 7 inches by 9 inches. So I did it on some graph paper. I started off with 1 inch increments. My graph paper has, is the 4 squares make 1 inch. So I first went 1, 2, 3, 4, mark, 1, 2, 3, 4, mark, 1, 2, 3, 4, mark. And then I labeled 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then I put a longer line up here. Alright, and then I came across this way. Did the same thing. 1, 2, 3, 4, mark. 1, 2, 3, 4, mark. 1, 2, 3, 4, mark. Alright, all the way, and then I marked 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So, and then I've already put on here where it suggests to put the pleats in a lighter, lighter pencil. So, that way it'll be easier for me to understand what I'm doing if I'm a beginner. So graph paper is a really great thing to use when you want to do something about this size. If it's less than 8.5 by 11, then, you know, graph paper is really great to draw something out on and get an idea of where you're at. All right, so I'm going to go ahead, cut this out, and in the pattern that I'm using, it says that you're going to need to bind it with pieces of fabric that are 1.5 inches wide by, then the straps are going to be 40 inches, and then the parts that bind the side are going to be 6 inches. But instead of cutting that out of this fabric, because I wasn't sure if I was going to have enough. Well, I guess I did. I found some bias tape that my mom had bought. So my mom bought this bias tape for $165. I found this in the stuff. I've been going through a lot of stuff because I had to turn some storage space into some office space so that way my husband could work from home. And so I've been going through a lot of stuff. This is the bias tape. Now the stuff I'm going to use is actually the sea green. Alright. And it is, when I open it up, it is actually 1.5 inches wide, and they did a little bit more than of 1/4 of an inch. It's like just a hair more, so that all the way across, this is 7/8 of an inch from end to end, a little bit over, but that'll be perfect for what I need to do today. And it's called bias tape because it's been cut out on the bias, which is at a 45 degree angle on the fabric. I have avoided where it's been pieced. So there's a little seam right here. That's where they piece it together. It's not that it's a bad thing to use that piece, otherwise they wouldn't have it there at all. It's just if you're a beginner doing this, it does create a little bit of extra bulkiness when you're sewing it. So I tried to avoid it, but you would be fine if you needed to. You can see here the bias part, because the fabric is actually would be the end of a fabric, and this would be the other end, and they're sewn together. Everything, so it's cut on this diagonal, and that's what makes it a little bit stretchy, so that it can curve around things and such. So you don't have to use bias tape. I'm just doing it to save time. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. All right, so I've cut out my pattern from the graph paper. Technically, I actually don't need one. I cut it out with my regular scissors first, and now I'm going to use my fabric scissors. I've pinned it down. I normally use these pattern weights. The pattern weights right now are holding the fabric so it doesn't fall off my little pull-out table. But I can't really find them anymore. So you can use tuna cans, work really well as pattern weights. I think these are just washers that have had been dipped in some rubberized pink stuff, but I really like them. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and cut out. All right, everything's all cut out now. Now, in the pattern, there's a point where it wants you to use pins to guide you on how to put in the pleats. Another way to do that is to put little snips on the side. So I'm going to put little snips on each side. Okay, because you're supposed to have a mark 1/2 inch down, or 1.5 inches, 1 inch, 1/2 inch, 1 inch, 1/2 inch, 1 inch, 1.5 inches. That's where the pleats go. So I'm going to put in little tiny snips. All right, and now I'm going to turn it around, do the same thing. I'm only making these snips about 1/4 of an inch in, maybe. On this side, I'm getting mixed up by my 1 inch marks. I'm going to double check. One and a half, 1/2, 1/2, 1.5. Double check the other side. Yeah, I didn't get mixed up on this side. Alright, so I've got my little snips in there. I pinned around the edges to help keep things lined up. I realized I should have done my little snips after I sewed around. So, because I might unalign them, I want to make sure that the two different layers have the little snip lined up at all times. So, I pinned these together to just make sure that they stay lined up. So I'm going to turn on my sewing machine, and when I'm going to put it on a long stitch, because I'm just making sure that the pieces stay together, so I don't need to I don't really need to backstitch either. So I'm just going to sew at 1/4 of an inch. This is where I'm actually following the instructions now. Step 1 is to sew around the edges at 1/4 of an inch. Okay. I am going to put my needle down. Okay. I forgot to hold my threads before I put that down. That was bad of me. You can see that my one of my threads got pulled down underneath. That's what can happen when you don't hold the threads as you're starting. Sometimes I forget, and then it makes this kind of mess. There we go. Now it's cleaned up a little bit. Alright, so I'm going to show you on the graph paper first how these pleats work. So I've already pre-folded these lines. It says in the instruction to take the first pin and bring it down to the second pin. So these were my first 2 lines, okay? So there's 1.5 inches. You can tell because there's 6 squares. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that's 1.5 inches. And that's where I put my first pin or my first snip, or this is a line, okay? And then the next one down from that is 1 inch. Okay? So what I'm going to bring this pin or this section down to this section like this. Okay? You can kind of, if you look on the side, you can see how that works. I don't know if that, okay? That means in this 1 inch, it's getting folded down. There's like a 1/2 inch right here. But there's a 1/2 inch on this side and a 1/2 inch on that side. So that's why there's 1 inch. Okay? And then there's a 1/2 inch in between them. So I wait another 1/2 inch before I start my next one. Okay? So this goes down to here. I'm going to say lines for now. My first line goes down to my second line. My third line goes down to my fourth line. And my fifth line goes down to my sixth line. So that everything is like this when it lays nice and flat. These are a kind of pleat. I think they're called knife pleats. I don't know why. There's different kinds of pleats based on which way you fold them and which way the folds are facing each other and that sort of thing. So, I don't know why they're called knife pleats, but they're all going to be like this, okay? So bring the first down to the second, the third to the fourth, and the fourth to the fifth. It doesn't help that I have the inches on the side, but if I pull it out, you can see that I have 5 lines total, or 6 lines total. On the fabric itself, I'm going to take my first snip, and it's going to fold this way, I'm going to bring it down to my second snip right there. Okay. I want this to create a nice straight line. I'm going to put in a pin. Okay. On the other side, I want to make sure they're going the same way, so I'm going to take my first one and bring it down to my second one. And I dropped my pin. Okay. So now I have both of them in. All right. You do not have to do one side then the other side. I just want to make sure that when you're doing it, you have them going the same way. All right. All right. All right, and then I am going to sew at 1/4 of an inch again, so that way it holds these in place. Now, because this is something that I want to hold in place a little better, I'm going to use regular stitch length. I'm going to use a regular stitch length. Okay. Now, if I look on the back side, I want to make sure I sew across all of the places where there's like 3 layers of fabric. When I'm going the other direction like this, these folds might want to come up. So I want to make sure I hold them down really nicely. Right here, I can feel the fold underneath. I want to make sure I sew over that bit. I can feel the fold. I'm past the needle, so I can backstitch. Nope. Okay. So I went ahead and I ironed these so you can see the pleats really well. Alright, the next step for me to do is to sew the binding on the edges. I'm going to sew it on first to the wrong side, the back side, because whenever I sew binding on, when you sew it on the second time, I like the second sewing, the top, to be the top. Alright, so I've pinned it on. I'm going to look at the 2 different pinning systems. This is the one where I pin this way, and this one is where I pin it that way. I'm going to figure out which one I prefer, because if I end up making up a ton of these, then I can tell which one is going to be an easier way for me to do it. Okay? And I'm going to sew it at 1/4 of an inch. Now, normally that would be right here on the fold. If I sew a little bit over the fold to cover these stitches, it's not going to hurt my feelings. Okay? I guess I didn't need to make them 6 inches long either, because you end up taking out 3 inches with all the pleats. Okay. I don't actually know which pin style I preferred. So I've sewn these. If I end up sewing when I fold it back now, and I'm like, oh, I need to sew that, I need to cover those up. You don't need to, because this is the back side. Okay, but if you like sewed crooked or something like that, then you could sew over this again and it would be fine. So now that we've done that, I take it and I fold it over. See how it comes? Fold it over. Okay. And pin that in place. I want to pay attention to what's going on in the back. I can pull it all the way down like this. I want it to mostly match up. If it goes over a little bit, that's fine. But if it goes over a lot, it might be fine on this one. But when we do the one that has the actual ties on it, that one will need us to be more accurate. Okay. Okay. Now I'm going to top stitch. And I'm going to line it up with just this side of my presser foot. Not all of them have that feature, but another thing I could do if I wanted, if I have the ability to move my needle, I could make it so my needle is moved over here, and then I could sew at the edge of the presser foot. But I'm just going to sew right here with that edge right there. Alright, look how these came out. This looks really good. Now if you look at the back side, it kind of goes around a little bit. That is it looks pretty good, but that's the reason why I like to make sure that when I sew the second half of it, when it's on the top, because this is the side I'm going to see. This is how the mask is going to look, okay? Now, these scissors are strong enough. I'm supposed to trim this. So now I've got these nice edges. I'm going to now find the center. Okay, so I'm going to fold it in half. And I could put a pin here, or I can just put a little snip here. Same thing on the other side. Okay. And then I do the same thing with my straps. I'm not going to snip them though. I'm going to fold them in half. I will put a pin in. Okay. That way, when I am pinning everything together, I can match up my centers. So that way I have a center going, like I have the same amount on both sides. Okay? Alright, this is the part where I got everything all pinned up, and now I'm going to sew it just like I sewed the other short sides previously. My seam allowance here was a little bit off, so I'm going to re-sew it. Now that I've re-sewn it, it actually is the right seam allowance, and I can leave that other bit there, and it will fold over nicely now and look good. Now what I'm going to do is open things up and fold down the raw edge and then fold it back in, so that way it creates a nice clean edge when I sew it. I like to do this slow so that way it actually folds nicely. Sometimes it's a little bit hard. It's like you're folding backwards where the fold was. See, look at that. It looks really good. This is what I mentioned earlier. I want to make sure that they're meeting up fairly closely so that when I sew it across, it's not going to have like this one part that's way more sticking out than the other. I started this and then it just wasn't moving forward, so I ended up having to lift my presser foot, then lift my needle, and then push it forward so I could get it to sew. There we go. I had that problem again on the other one. I think that if I knew it was going to be this difficult, I would have maybe just sewn on the section where it's actually connecting to the face mask portion and then turned it around and come back the other way. It's because you've got that extra bulkiness. I don't have any problems when I'm ending the sewing. So if I started in the middle and then sewed out and then came back and went to the middle and sewed out again, it would have been easier. So there you have it. I don't like this style near as much because it still blows the air up into my glasses, but it's not as bad as wearing one of those like commercial masks that I've used before when like working on drywalling or something like that. So, and there's still enough space for me to tie bows, so that's nice. So there are the pleats, and yeah, they look the pleats look really good. They look almost like tucks. Tucks are actually sewn in place, whereas pleats are just sewn on the edge, not down the middle. So these are some good pleats. The binding is also pretty good. And if you wanted to, instead of having to make this whole thing, and it was especially difficult on the ends where I started. See how it got kind of nasty right there? It's because when I have it on the sewing machine and I'm first starting, there's only one side of the feed dog, the thing that pulls it through, to be able to pull it through. So I had to kind of lift the presser foot and then do a big no-no, which was to lift the needle and then kind of put it down again, so that way the feed dogs could start pulling it through. The whole thing where I folded this down and then before I folded this part down, before folding it in like this, makes it a little bit more bulky here, but then I don't have to go back and fold this down a couple times and sew across there. So it saves a little bit of extra sewing. But one of the things you could do is, instead of making the straps all part of this, you could have some ties, some ribbons, or some straps, or something like that, and you could bind this side, okay, and then you'd fold it in here, but on there, on that edge. I don't know if that makes sense. And you could just have this rectangle with the binding, and then add your other ties on afterwards, like just zigzag them on, right? So that's another way you could do it. But even if you're just a beginning sewer, you can make a mask that will save lives. So I know that a lot of the hospitals are in great need of these, so even a beginner sewer can do this. And so yeah, I hope that you enjoyed looking at how pleats are done. And I highly suggest, whenever you're doing a pleat, where did I put my paper? I don't know where I put my paper. But I found a Bruce instead. You know, if you put it on some paper and draw it out and look at how you're going to fold it beforehand, that might make it easier for you to figure out how you're going to do it before you do it on fabric, because the paper is going to keep a fold, whereas the fabric doesn't always necessarily keep a fold. You can also iron it as you're folding it. Sometimes that helps as well. So that way things stay nice and flat. All right. So, good luck to you. And, I hope that you all are able to stay safe, stay healthy. I didn't want to make this a whole like coronavirus focused thing, but it just happened to work really well with doing pleats today. So, all right, good luck. Can you sit behind me? You need to change the thread. All right, there we go.